Welcome back to Follow the Silence. Today we're diving into one of the most puzzling and controversial cases in recent true crime history, the mysterious death of Ellen Greenberg. She was a 27-year-old teacher, newly engaged, and by all accounts full of life. But in 2011, she was found dead inside her apartment in Philadelphia with multiple stab wounds. What happened inside apartment 603 that night? Was this truly a tragic case of suicide? Or something far more sinister? Let's break it down. Ellen was a beloved elementary school teacher, engaged to her fiancé, Samuel Goldberg, planning their wedding. Friends and family describe her as kind, dependable, and someone with no history of violence or reckless behavior. At the time, she lived with Samuel in a sixth-floor apartment in Manayunk, Philadelphia. On the afternoon of January 26, 2011, a fierce winter storm descended upon Philadelphia. Snow fell thick and fast, blanketing the city in a heavy shroud of white, snarling traffic and forcing an early end to the workday for thousands. The blizzard wasn't just weather, it was an event, creating an atmosphere of isolation and forcing the city's inhabitants indoors, muffling the sounds of the world outside. Among those heading home early was Ellen Greenberg. A first-grade teacher, she was dismissed along with her students as the storm intensified. After a quick stop for groceries to ride out the blizzard, she navigated the treacherous roads back to the Venice Lofts apartment she shared with her fiancé, Samuel Goldberg. She was likely looking forward to a quiet, cozy evening, a warm refuge from the storm raging outside. Around 6:40 p.m., Samuel returned from the gym. He walked up to their sixth-floor apartment, key in hand, expecting to find Ellen inside. But when he turned the key, the door wouldn't budge. He tried again, confused. It was then he realized the problem. The swing bar lock, a latch that could only be engaged from the inside, was fastened. He knew Ellen was home. Her car was in the garage. Why would she lock him out? He called her name through the door. Silence. He knocked, then pounded, his initial confusion quickly turning to a cold, creeping dread. He pulled out his phone, sending a series of increasingly frantic texts. "Hello? Open the door. What are you doing?" No reply. He called her cell. It went straight to voicemail. After nearly 30 minutes of fruitless effort, a now panicked Samuel raced downstairs to get the building's security guard. Together, they returned to the apartment. With the guard's permission and assistance, Samuel put his shoulder to the door, forcing it with all his might. The sound of splintering wood echoed in the quiet hallway as the frame gave way. He stepped inside. The apartment was dark and eerily silent, save for the howling wind outside. He called her name again, his voice tight with fear. "Ellen? Ellen!" He moved through the living room and into the kitchen. And that's when he saw her. Ellen was on the floor, slumped against the cabinets in a pool of blood. She was unresponsive. The scene was one of unimaginable violence. She had been stabbed 20 times. A 10-inch kitchen knife was still embedded deep in her chest. Samuel's hysterical 911 call brought police and paramedics racing to the scene. To the first officers who arrived, it looked like a clear and brutal homicide. The apartment was immediately sealed off, and detectives were called in. The primary puzzle was the door, locked from the inside. It suggested Ellen had either let her killer in, or that the attacker had somehow vanished from a sealed apartment. Investigators began meticulously processing the scene, documenting every clue. But as the night wore on and the medical examiner conducted a preliminary review, the facts began to point away from the obvious. Certain details, the nature of the wounds, the lack of defensive injuries, the pristine state of the rest of the apartment, didn't fit the profile of a typical homicide. Within hours, the case that began as a suspected murder started shifting into something far more complex and deeply unsettling. When first responders entered Ellen Greenberg's apartment, the scene was profoundly disturbing. Her body was found on the kitchen floor, having sustained a staggering 20 stab wounds. These weren't just to her chest and abdomen. 10 of the wounds were located on the back of her neck and head, areas incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to reach with one's own hand. The sheer brutality and location of the injuries screamed of a violent attack. The weapon, a large knife from her own kitchen block, was still embedded deep in her chest, a final, brutal punctuation mark on the scene. Based on this overwhelming physical evidence, the initial assessment from the scene was clear. The Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office, after conducting an autopsy, concurred. Dr. Marlon Osborne, a pathologist with the office, officially ruled Ellen Greenberg's death a homicide. The investigation immediately began in earnest, treating the apartment as the scene of a violent murder. Detectives started constructing a timeline of Ellen's final hours, searching for a suspect who could have committed such a heinous act against the young teacher. But then, something shifted. Behind closed doors, a series of communications reportedly took place between the medical examiner's office and the district attorney's office. The official narrative began to change, quietly at first, then decisively. In a move that has baffled legal and forensic experts for over a decade, the cause of death was officially amended. The same pathologist who had declared it a homicide reversed his decision. The new ruling? Suicide. The case file was stamped, the investigation pivoted, and the search for a killer was abruptly called off. So what prompted this dramatic reversal? The official reasoning hinged on a few key details about the scene. First, the apartment door showed no signs of forced entry. More importantly, it had been secured from the inside with a swing bar lock, a latch that can only be engaged by someone inside the apartment. When Ellen's fiancé returned home, he couldn't get in. The building's security guard had to physically break the door frame to gain entry. To investigators, this painted the picture of a sealed room, a classic locked room mystery where the only possible perpetrator was the person found inside. Investigators also pointed to Ellen's mental state, discovering she had recently sought help for anxiety. They theorized that in the throes of a sudden mental health crisis, she had inflicted the 20 wounds upon herself. But this narrative was immediately challenged. Independent forensic pathologists argued that the physical evidence was fundamentally incompatible with suicide. For instance, several wounds to the back of her neck were deep, penetrating spinal tissue. Experts questioned how any person could inflict such wounds on themselves, let alone continue to stab themselves 19 more times. Furthermore, there was a notable absence of hesitation marks, which are typical in self-inflicted stabbings. The official conclusion simply did not add up, and for many, it marked not the end of an investigation, but the beginning of a cover-up. The official story of Ellen Greenberg's death hinges on one almost unbelievable premise, that she took her own life. But from the very beginning, the physical evidence seemed to scream a different story. The first and most glaring question revolves around the sheer number of wounds. 20 stab wounds in total. Could someone truly inflict so many wounds on themselves? 10 to her neck and back, and 10 more to her chest, abdomen, and stomach. Medical and forensic experts find this number highly improbable for a suicide. The act of self-infliction is physically and psychologically grueling. To bypass the body's overwhelming instinct for self-preservation, not just once but 20 separate times, pushes the boundaries of credulity. Then there is the question of location. Why were there stab wounds in Ellen's back and the back of her neck? These are areas notoriously difficult, if not impossible, to reach with any degree of force, let alone the precision seen in the autopsy. One wound in particular plunged nearly 4 inches deep into her chest, while another traveled through her vertebrae and severed her spinal cord. Neurologists consulted on the case confirmed this specific injury would have caused immediate paralysis and loss of motor control, making any further action, including inflicting more wounds or cleaning a weapon, an absolute impossibility. The angles and locations of these injuries led many to a chilling conclusion. It's this mountain of physical evidence that has fueled her parents, Josh and Sandy Greenberg, in their decade-long fight for justice. They, along with a team of independent experts, have long argued that the evidence points unequivocally toward homicide. Renowned forensic pathologists like Dr. Cyril Wecht and Dr. Henry Lee have reviewed the case files, autopsy reports, and crime scene photos. Their conclusions are stark. The nature and placement of the wounds are far more consistent with a violent, homicidal attack than a suicide. Adding to the complexity is the nature of the wounds themselves. The initial autopsy noted that some of Ellen's injuries appeared to be shallow hesitation marks, which can be common in suicides. However, these were found alongside other wounds that were forceful, deep, and clearly fatal. The combination is highly unusual. A person committing suicide typically does not inflict multiple shallow cuts before plunging a knife deep into their own spinal cord. The force required for the deeper wounds, especially the one that pierced bone, suggests a level of violence and determination that seems inconsistent with the hesitation marks. This detail presents a logical paradox that investigators have never been able to adequately explain. How could a person stab themselves 20 times, with the final blows causing paralysis? It's a scenario that defies logic and common sense, and for many, it's the single detail that makes the suicide ruling completely untenable. The crime scene, or lack thereof, adds another layer of mystery. The apartment showed no obvious signs of a struggle. There was no overturned furniture, no defensive wounds on Ellen's hands or arms, and no blood trails suggesting a chase or fight. On the surface, this might seem to support the suicide theory, but some experts argue the opposite. The scene was almost neat. A bowl of fruit she had been cutting sat on the counter, perfectly sliced. This detail doesn't paint a picture of a person in the throes of a violent suicidal frenzy. Instead, it suggests a calm, domestic moment that was suddenly and brutally interrupted. And finally, there is the matter of Samuel Goldberg, Ellen's fiancé. He was the one who discovered her body after allegedly breaking down the door to their locked apartment. He was also the one who made the frantic 911 call. Police questioned him, but he was quickly cleared of any involvement, with his alibi of being at the complex's gym seemingly holding up. However, in the years since, he has remained a controversial figure in the public discussion of the case. His behavior on the 911 call and his account of the evening have been scrutinized by the Greenberg family's legal team and a legion of online sleuths. While he has never been charged, the questions surrounding his role on that tragic night persist, leaving a shadow of doubt that the initial investigation failed to dispel. Ellen's parents, Joshua and Sandra Greenberg, have spent more than a decade fighting for answers. They filed lawsuits demanding her case be reopened. Multiple independent experts have supported their suspicions. In 2024, Pennsylvania courts heard renewed arguments and media coverage, including an upcoming Hulu documentary, Death in Apartment 603, has reignited public interest. The question remains, why did the ruling change from homicide to suicide? To this day, Ellen Greenberg's death remains one of the most debated mysteries in recent history. Was she truly alone in that apartment, or did investigators miss key evidence pointing toward foul play? Her parents continue their fight for the truth, hoping one day her case will officially be reconsidered. What do you think really happened in apartment 603? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more true crime cases like this one, don't forget to subscribe to follow the silence.